Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start the panel. This is more opportunities in big data. And I'm Kathleen Kennedy. I'm from MIT Technology Review, and I'm also the president of the MIT Enterprise Forum, and I'll be the moderator today for this panel. We're going to talk about big data and the opportunities there are for entrepreneurs, which are many. And we've assembled a wonderful panel of experts here that are going to first introduce themselves and talk to you about what they do, and also introduce some trends that they're seeing for entrepreneurs around big data. And then I'm going to ask them questions, and I'm going to open it up to you rather early on. So I want you to start thinking about what the questions that you have for the panelists. So first, I'm going to start all the way down at the end there with Arkady, and he will go ahead and start from there. Arkady.
So we start just with introductions? Or?
That's correct.
Okay.
So,
first of all, I can speak two languages. I can speak Russian or heavy accented English. So, по-русски или по-английски? Как? So the audience prefers Russian. Catherine, sorry.
That's quite all right. Take it away.
My name is Arkady Volozh, and I'm a co-founder and the Director General of Yandex. We are the biggest internet company in Europe today. We work in different markets, Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey.
Talk about why you're here today.
Мы здесь.
We are here today to talk about big data. Well, the internet is the first industry, or one of the first industries that has to work with big data. And it was in the internet that the huge massives of data appeared about different kind of things, about people, facilities, and other things. So internet doesn't only have to deal with big data, but also has to provide algorithms for data processing. And Yandex understands this. And we are working on different algorithms and machine learning. So Yandex was set up 15 years ago. And now all the knowledge and skills are in high demand in different places, in different industries, because there are more and more data that the industries have to deal with. IT technologies improve, sensors get cheaper, the users have different kind of devices that generate lots of data. So there's an ocean of data, and any person can become the generator of data. So the ability to process the data gives us new knowledge, not only about people and about the world around us, but it can also change many things in our life. If you take big data, you can, and process it in the right way, you can predict certain things, or you can make machine think instead of us and improve our life. And this is, I can call it the second industrial revolution. Just like we know how to automate certain mechanical things, now we can automate mental things. So this is a process of automation, and we're working in this direction. So the internet became first source, and there are many skills that we can apply in different areas.
Thank you very much. Now, next, we have Sergey, who's from EMC. Sergey.
Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you. I represent company EMC, who is the world leader for storage and processing information. It's like a federation which consists of different technological areas, and I'm the head of big data. So we analyze and process big data. Why we came here is just because we work on different platforms and software for processing big data, all kinds of big data depending on the quality. We develop applications and different tools to create applications, and we also develop different tools for cloud-based services. And this is very often it's going to it looks like a future platform for big data.
Sergey, thank you so much. And next we have Sean from Cloudera.
Thank you, and I apologize in advance. I can only speak English. I've got just one language, so bear with me or tune in on your headset, please. So I'm a director of data science at Cloudera, and to explain what that means and maybe explain to some of you in the room what Cloudera is, I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about what I think big data is and why it's brought us here today to talk about big data. And that'll explain what Cloudera is. So why do we have big data? Why are we talking about big data? I think the answers are the web and mobile. So with the rise of web technologies and then mobile, the amount of data out there to collect has increased, not just doubled or tripled, but increased by orders of magnitude. And the big technology companies out there like Google or Yandex or Facebook were the first to have to struggle with this amount of data in the early 2000s. And so internally they went off and developed brand new types of technology to cope with that scale. So in the mid-2000s, I worked at Google, and we had a bunch of technologies that were fairly specific to Google and only inside Google to process, to store, and to serve this volume of data that was just unprecedented in the world because of this explosion of data from the web and mobile devices. But over time, starting in about 2007 and 2008, some of those ideas, those technologies, became open source projects like Apache Hadoop. And some of you in your room, I think, will know Apache Hadoop as a re-implementation of some of the big data storage and processing ideas found to date only before that inside Google and Facebook and Yahoo, for example. And that's where Cloudera comes in. So Cloudera is a company that provides services, support, training, and packaging around Hadoop, which is an open source set of technologies like the kinds of technologies you would find inside of your big tech companies. And so the good news is that that's something that is in all of our hands today. You can go download and run the same kinds of technologies, mostly, that you would find inside these big tech companies. And I think that's one of the reasons that big data is most interesting from an entrepreneurship perspective. To take advantage of big data, I think we need at least 4 things. We need hardware, lots of hardware to store and run computations. We need software. We need the software to manage this hardware at large scale. We need some expertise in what it means to mine and analyze data. And then we need the data. So the good news is the hardware is very cheap today. You can buy it cheaply, you can rent it cheaply in the cloud, so check. 2, the software is now free and open source, so that's where the likes of Cloudera comes in. 3, expertise is still in short supply, I think. There's still relatively few people with both engineering knowledge and some of the domain expertise and the statistical and mathematical knowledge needed to mine data. And that's where the opportunity for I think, entrepreneurship and smart entrepreneurs comes in. The big interesting question for me that I'd like to engage in this panel is the data, because that's the thing that's maybe not as easily transferable between big companies and small companies and not as easily shareable. And that may make the difference. That may be a key issue for entrepreneurship. It's both an opportunity and an obstacle as entrepreneurs try to take advantage of big data and make new business opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, very much. And we'll get to that question that you just introduced. But first, I'd like to have Roman introduce himself.
Всем добрый день.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Roman Zykov. I'm director for analytics, retail rocket company. I'm a co-founder of this company. We develop online recommendation systems for e-commerce projects in Russia. We have had hundreds of customers in Russia. Well, we basically are involved in monetization of shop data to increase their sales, and it's been quite successful. Before Retail Rocket, I worked for Ozon.ru, Wikimart, Ostrovok.ru, and I also created analytical systems. So I was involved with analysis and research. So I'm a practitioner and work with quite big data. I have worked in Retail Rocket not only with my hands but also with my head. I write codes in order to process terabytes of data that we collect. So I hope that I'll be able to dispel some myths related to big data. Thank you.
So, and as I said, I'm Kathleen Kennedy from MIT Technology Review, and if you're not familiar with MIT Technology Review, we're MIT's magazine of innovation. I'm based in Cambridge, and we write all about emerging technologies and really talk about what are the trends in technologies that people need to know about and how can they capitalize on them. So we do an annual list of the top 10 technology trends every year, and about 12 years ago, we identified data mining, what was called then, as a really important new trend. And so fast forward now 12 years later, and it's really exploded with, as some of the panelists talked about, sort of mobile devices and all these different devices and the Internet of Things. There's really interesting opportunities with big data. So as I said, I'm going to open it up to audience questions, but I've got a few questions here that I want to talk to the panel about. So we're going to start with really this idea about what are the opportunities for entrepreneurs. We've got a couple entrepreneurs here on the stage, as well as 2 data scientists, so I think that we can have a really interesting conversation. So I want to toss it out to Arkady, and let's pick up on the conversation of what Sean started talking about. And, you know, where are the opportunities that you're seeing?
First of all, I would like to give you some examples of big data processing so that it could be clear where we're going and where we can go. All the services that you use in the internet, Yandex and not only Yandex, are based on machine training and big data. And it's applicable to search engines. For example, you can see tens of references and links. So it means that behavior of other users has been analyzed. It means that if you ask some question, somebody has already asked such question. And so it means that the machine can give you the answer based on other people's behavior. So what kind of translation system do we have? I mean, language translation. 20 years ago, translation system was a very difficult structure because there was no access to big database. 10 years ago, translation paradigm has changed, and there are lots of translated texts in the internet. Many people translated many things, and we can find this very fast. And so while analyzing different texts, we can do a lot of things, and that's the way how it works. We have more than 20 languages in Yandex that can translate different things. When we look at, for example, traffic jams, we analyze GPS tracks. We can see how long it took different people to go from one point to another. And I can give you millions of similar examples. So this all became possible because there are certain algorithm of machine learning, and it's much easier to learn on the basis of big data. What else can we do using this approach? We analyze different areas around us. When we have big data centers, hardware, which is not very expensive, when we have algorithms that can analyze data, when we have data scientists, when we have people that can make machine learn, and we can speak about different industries. For example, retail. I'm sure you have lots of stories about retail, but this is the area where many people do similar things. And if, for example, you can do what we do in internet advertising, we use targeting advertising. We can predict what users should see advertising on which page or portal it can be done, and it can also be done offline, not only online. So, for example, if you buy some product, we can predict what product should you see next, so that it would be more effective for salespeople. Another example is from a different area. Today's aircraft have different kind of sensors, and they have thousands of sensors. And so all those sensors collect data about temperature, pressure, and other things. If we take a look at this data through algorithm, we can predict which detail, which spare part can be broken. So while the aircraft is somewhere in the air, we can predict that people at the airport should wait for this plane to land and prepare some pumps that will fix that spare case. And it means that we can save millions of dollars. And the most important thing, that people won't suffer. There are lots of examples from financial sphere. We target our advertising in internet, and speaking about finances, it's also possible to offer products. For example, if you buy certain things using your credit card, probably more things should be offered to you. Or like spam filters work, it's easy to identify who is a reliable buyer and who is not. So all these areas are automated, can be automated through servers, algorithm, and people. And that's what we have been doing in the last 15 years. So that's what we do in our project, which is called Factory for Data Analysis. I would like to continue what Arkady started. The first people that faced the problems or the challenges related to data analysis were internet companies. So they were the first to think of some instruments, algorithms that can be used. And it's true that those techniques that we are using now were developed 30 to 40 years ago. So what we are doing now is about giving opportunity to different companies, not only Yandex and Google, to work with the data that the company has. So our technologies can give you a lot of an opportunity and basically provide or enable you to find the information which can be hidden in the company. And it was a good example that Arkady gave related to aircrafts. We had airplanes 100 years ago, but it's only now that we have an opportunity to collect all the data and based on that data predict different failures and find optimal solutions for aircraft operation, identify all the characteristics based on fuel parameters. For example, maybe the size of certain parts should be higher in order to reduce the fuel amount spent by the aircraft. So all this data is available for all those companies that are going to work with this data. So technologies are secondary because they are quite mature, and user experience is primary. It comes first because it's about the ability to use technologies in different businesses in order to solve certain tasks.
Sure. So the question was, what sort of entrepreneurial opportunities does big data hold out for us?
Yes.
Now, I come at this from an engineering perspective. I'm an engineer by trade, a software engineer, and a statistician second, you could say. But certainly, I don't come at it from a business perspective, and that's, I think, certainly even Cloudera's DNA is engineering. So the first thing that comes to mind is there an entrepreneurial opportunity in commercializing new algorithms or new technologies? I think there are. I think those are a relatively small number of entrepreneurial opportunities there. Part of the reason is that some of the things we need already as technologies and algorithms, they're not new. They're known. A lot of them exist in nice open source software that's already free. So there are some opportunities to commercialize certain new advanced techniques and technologies, but I don't find that to be the nature of most of the big data entrepreneurial opportunities. For me, entrepreneurial opportunity comes up when we have all the pieces, right? The software, the hardware, the expertise, and the data. And it's really the data that's maybe the most challenging to an entrepreneur. Sure, we live in a world just saturated with data, but it's not necessarily true that I immediately have access to all the data that I need to pursue my business idea. I think a lot of interesting big data startups and entrepreneurs have focused on using data that's already out there in a new way. Maybe it's public data, satellite data, for example. I can think of one small company we work with who takes existing open satellite data and uses it to figure out how many people are parked in parking lots at retailers around the world. And from that gets a very interesting view into how busy these different businesses are at what times of day, and maybe even understands how the seasonality and trends varies in geographies and by business. And that itself is valuable derived data that they've built a whole business around reselling to retailers and other people that want to understand how much people are shopping and where they are and maybe why. So that's an interesting example of an entrepreneurial opportunity enabled by the software and hardware we've got, some smarts, and some free public data. So I would encourage entrepreneurs to think about first what's data is already out there ready to be mined in a new way.
Great. And Roman, you want to talk to us about the retail perspective?
Ну, мы на самом деле.
Our project that was set up is a great example for B2B, for internet, that can monetize their data and make money. We carry out services for data outsourcing. So we provide products that help the users do shopping, and this increases customer loyalty and other things. So this is one of the problems that e-commerce faces. Another problem is related to pricing. In the internet, you can change the price every second.
In fact, there are stores which quote one-time price if you come from a certain site. I've seen such practices. The third thing I would like to say is logistics tasks. In internet stores like Ozone Rule, there are thousands of books. Can you imagine the volume? I've seen their warehouses, and the books kept in warehouses are just frozen money. You can't use this money, and they are not circulating until you have sold them. A very effective system for forecasting the demand. Well, any retailer would pay you $1 million for such system. Number 4, about e-commerce, is advertisement. advertisement optimization. Yandex rule gives you API. You can write any robot yourself, and it will manage advertisement in a website. There is a lot of room for improvement there. There are many startups in Russia that are quite successful in recovering money for advertisement. This is my vision of e-commerce.
Throw it over to Sergey to talk about, give us the larger company perspective. And I think that there's probably some opportunities for entrepreneurs to serve large businesses.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Talking about how big data and opportunities for entrepreneurs thinking about the big business perspective and large corporations. And are there gaps and opportunities for entrepreneurs to fill utilizing big data to help serve some needs for large companies?
Ну, на самом деле, те возможности, которые...
In fact, the opportunities of big and small companies are different. What we have seen, based on our experience, if you remember, the definition given to big data is when you can't process information on the basis of tools or means that you used to have. At that moment, the company faces the problem of big data. So big companies in the sphere of big data, many of them at least, banks, telecom, retail, they tried with the help of instruments for processing big data, try to solve this task. They understand what they want from big data because their business is stable. They have a stable business culture and stable expectations of what they want from from processing big data, and they lacked tools to extract this data. Now they have tools that allow them to extract data from information from big data. There's an opposite trend as well. Tools for processing and extracting information from big data are sometimes free of charge and are available. And there are a lot of opportunities for big companies. All the technological platforms exist, and there are great opportunities for small companies. So to enter this market and start creating their own products, like retail or Rocket started, no big investments are necessary because all the platforms are available free of charge, and there's a good idea and a good team. You can work with big data in two ways. You can take big massives of data, take your engineers, and look for orders using your algorithms with the help of your engineer. This is good for big business like Yandex. What Cloudera does, or IFC, well, a small example of how these services are provided in small companies. Yandex has a joint venture with a small startup where 10 or 12 people work, Seismotech. They know how to process geological information. Geological information is one of the biggest massives of data historically. And a small startup cannot afford buying big data centers, write all the algorithms, and process all the data. So we set up a joint venture. We hired these guys, and we gave them servers and methods of storage, and they started doing what they used to do on their workstations, and now they started working on our cloud, and it took them only a few hours. So the joint venture was very successful. A small startup started competing with huge companies, and they won in auctions, and they process data on our in our centers. Я бы хотел
You asked what are some examples of small companies providing big database services to large companies. So I can think of three examples that illustrate most of the types of most of the patterns I see where small companies are able to do something well that maybe big companies can't or can't do effectively. One example is taking public data that is messy and making it available in a much nicer form. There's a company in the United Kingdom called Doodle. They take public data about companies in the UK. This is public data from the UK government, which comes in a very messy form. And they properly parse it and scan documents and read the text and make it available in a much, much nicer form. Same data, much more accessible, and they've built a great business around selling access to the same data, just in a much more cleaned up form. And they've poured in a lot of expertise in cleaning that up. So I think there's actually a lot of opportunities of that form, because there's actually a lot of data out there from governments that are useful, but in wildly different formats. And if you're willing to do the dirty work of cleaning and joining this data, that could be very valuable as a business. Two other examples. I think there are a couple particular use cases where it makes sense to, as a large company, to maybe outsource a particular machine learning or big data problem. And I can think of two examples like that. One key one is recommender systems, of course. It's very easy to hook in your stream of click events and such from your retail website to a third-party service that can specialize in understanding how to learn from that data and feed product recommendations back to you to give to your users. That's a common use case. It's difficult to do really, really well, actually. And so it's no surprise that there are many successful businesses built around just that one style of machine learning, recommender systems. Another one that comes to mind is detecting fraud, for example. This is, again, it's a hard problem, detecting when someone clicking on your website is actually a robot or a hacker. But it's fairly easy to feed logs, standard logs, to a third-party service that can specialize in learning from that data and helping you understand when some activity on your website is fraudulent. So again, we work with a company in the UK that does exactly that. And although you would think big companies could or should or might do that in-house, it turns out that there's a great entrepreneurial opportunity there for a small company who specializes in solving this one problem to build a business around solving this problem for a bunch of large companies. So maybe that gives an example of some of the small business opportunities around big data in serving needs of larger businesses.
Awesome, thank you. And Sean just introduced the next topic that I want to go to, and that's thinking about government and open data. And you've probably heard a lot about that. I can actually give an example of a startup that I started using open data. And let me set the stage real quick. So I live in Boston in a very dense neighborhood, and there's nowhere to park. You street park, and there's days where there's street cleaning, so you have to remember to move the car, or you have people put up permits, so they're going to be doing construction or something, and that can happen at any time. And if you don't drive every day, you just park your car, you don't know that that's been posted, and your car gets towed. So I don't know if that's a problem in Moscow, but it's a big problem in Boston. So we thought, well, how can we find out about these things? And it turns out that there's public records, but as Sean talked about, they're very difficult to read and understand. So we thought, how can we provide a service for this? So we created an app that basically takes that feed, and you can download it, and then you just check in where you parked your car. And if any permits get pulled or there's street cleaning that day, it will send you a reminder so that you know to move your car. So no more towing. So it was a very simple app, but it was interesting that there was no one doing that, and we sort of jumped in and built this little company that did it. But anyway, it's another example about that there's lots of opportunities with public data and how you can build a useful company around it. So I wanted to throw the idea about open data from governments and thinking about it from a policy standpoint as well as from an opportunity standpoint. And Roman, do you have any thoughts on this one, or anyone else want to pick that up?
Я думаю, здесь ничего.
I'm not going to tell you anything special. Probably other speakers could answer this question. I don't have much experience in this sphere. There are a lot of examples when we use open data in our applications. You mentioned parking lots, and we use similar information from municipal governments in Russia. Sometimes we get information from open data on blocking streets, on street accidents. It is not just user information, it is also information for algorithms. We change routes to bypass these blocked areas or areas where accidents had occurred.
Talk about opportunities in Russia and where you see specific opportunities for this market.
The question.
Oh, sure, we can take a
Алексеев
question.
Анатолий Сатинович, я председатель правления Макронет.
I'm chairman of Macronet. We had a government information system, and those, Mr. Volozh knows it, he knows Lushkov. In the 70s, we had a system that I transferred part of it to Google. It is a system of intelligence, chief intelligence office. I did not sign the agreement. It was academician Velikhov who signed it. Recently, we met with the government of Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and we agreed to transfer a lot of software products that are obsolete because they belong to 70s and 80s. What you are telling us about e-commerce, we have it. It's information support, OCAL's technologies, based on American standard. It has everything that concerns industry, not just designing. It's a big network. We had a network with Warsaw Treaty countries, the supply of raw materials, and cooperation. You can take information there about warehouse, transport, logistics. We also received an offer for intellectual transport system. There is electronic document turnover that existed on the whole territory of Russia and Warsaw Treaty countries, as well as Asian agreement. You also publish a journal, international journal, and if we could find an international organization, we could provide these materials for international transportation, international contacts, anything. Who is interested? You say you publish a journal. Who might be interested in it? For many years, people have been saying that this should be done, and it was done in the Soviet Union, and we are prepared to give you part of these software products. And like when Google or Yandex were created, no money was paid. Here, all the developers are about 80 or 90. Otherwise, these developments will simply die. The developments that existed in the Soviet Union will simply be lost. You say you have contacts all over the world. How can you organize an international company to implement these developments?
Хорошо. Мы это после сессии можем обсудить.
After the session, we could discuss it. Yes.
Let's go back to the topic about the unique opportunities in Russia. Sergey, you want to talk about that?
Опять же, мы со своей стороны
From our side, we have a narrow, focused vision of the opportunities in the Russian market. We are a commercial company, and we can see projects that can be commercialized, and mostly these are big industrial companies in the Russian market. For my part, I can say that I've been working with big data topic for 3 years and a half. I spoke at such events like this one, and from the audience I heard that I am either speaking of the far future or about companies like Google, Yandex, American Express, biggest American companies or biggest European companies. Maybe our Yandex Mail.ru, but for usual small and medium-sized companies, this is just tomorrow. Today, the situation has changed dramatically. If we take all cellular operators, all of them use big data technologies or implement pilot projects. Last year, the first top 10 banks, and this year, probably the top 40 banks are interested in it. And the tools that used to be very expensive or complicated, or people did not have experience of using them or implementing them effectively, now they are more affordable and accessible. It's clear how to use them, why they should be used, and today we can say that all big companies and medium-sized companies in Russia, in the spheres that are working in the competitive market, like telecom, retail banking, they are looking at big data technologies as any usual data for everyday work.
Roman, why don't you talk to opportunities in Russia? Are there unique opportunities that you see here?
Ну, я вижу такую уникальную возможность с теми.
I can see some unique opportunity to continue working with the entrepreneurs that we began working on startups and that came for consultations with me. I can see there's very big area for us to work because there's very weak competition. If you want to set up a project related to data processing, you can, for example, analyze the diseases of people, whether a person gets sick or not, and then you can get this model and monetize it. This is the easiest example that I can think about. Then another thing is that we have Tinkoff Credit Systems Bank. I know this company, I communicate with them, and they build a very good structure, both management structure and team structure, in terms of using data for providing loans, so that the loans would have very low risks. So our market is lagging behind, and the American market is much more advanced, so it's a high time that we started the projects that could be used for developing new products for Russian companies, and there is the demand for this, and I've already mentioned e-commerce.
Kathleen, could I, strangely, could I make a comment on the Russian market? I know very little about the Russian market, but maybe I have one comment to make. So I come at this from the data science perspective, right? And the interesting thing about data science is it's whatever it means, it's a blend of engineering and statistics and math. And then say the last decade of technological development, it's been a story of engineering, right? Building bigger disk drives and faster processors and larger scale data systems. And suddenly what's important again is the statistics side of things. And my impression of the Russian market is that there's a lot of engineering talent for sure, but a lot of mathematical talent as well, more so than you would find in the United States. So I would imagine that puts the Russian market in a very good position to provide this so-called this data science going forward, which is so in demand, because it's going to require people with not only the engineering skills, but a mathematical and statistical background as well.
I agree. Do you want to build on that?
Я бы еще, наверное, добавил вот какую вещь с точки зрения.
I would like to add one thing which would be relevant for small business. Yes, there is big data, big systems for data processing, but this is more applicable for large companies. And large companies have good infrastructure, but it can be available for startups and small business because this gives them a lot of opportunities. But there's something in between here. Very good thing is related to the big data generation, and this big data is generated by different players. So it's possible to combine different data from different areas, and you can build on top of it a lot of things. So I'm speaking about data market. For example, Yandex has a lot of data related to users' behavior in the internet. And we use this data for different things, for example, for target advertising or for predicting traffic jams. If you take this data and use it in a different area, then it will be very interesting. For example, we had a very interesting initiative when we used some data about the users, and we would use it for offline data. For example, let's say you have a website, or e-commerce project, or a magazine. So you get the visitor, and you can tell Yandex that you had this visitor. Can you tell me something about this person? And Yandex will feed some information about that visitor. For example, the system will show you the page that will provide you relevant information about that visitor, or maybe some information about the product that the person wants to buy. So it means that the data generated in one area can be used in a completely different area. So there's exchange between different areas, and e-commerce is generating their own data, and these signals can be useful for targeting advertising or other goals. So the exchange of such data provides a lot of opportunities for small enterprises and for entrepreneurs.
Introduce the next topic, and where I was going is, you know a lot about us. And thinking about all this data, and then thinking about the individual, what are our rights to privacy? So I don't think you can have a big data conversation about really jumping into the privacy discussion. So Sean, you want to pick this up and talk about what are the issues here?
Yeah, you're right. You really can't talk about data and lots of data without people asking about the implications of that. I think people hear big data, certainly when I say I work with big data, and assume it means I'm collecting data, we are collecting data for some negative purpose. And I think people are right to be skeptical. I think people hear stories about data being used or misused or abused, and I think people know that they simply do not know how a lot of their data is being used. From my perspective, data is neither good nor bad, and analyzing data, using data is neither good nor bad in and of itself. So I think part of the problem that the industry has to solve here is transparency, so helping people understand what data is being collected and what it's being used for, and also making it clear what value it's bringing to them. I think we take for granted the kind of value we get from, for example, using Yandex and having that information Yandex learn about what I want and where I'm going. We take for granted all that value we're getting. We only think about the potential for abuses. And so I think it's necessary to balance the conversation by pointing out all the value we are getting, even by sharing some of our personal data. But at the same time, I think one of the keys to solving this problem and solving the skepticism around big data is simply transparency. Saying what you're storing, showing what you're storing, and then I think people will be more comfortable with the idea.
Roman, I imagine you deal with this a lot, thinking about Retail Rocket and what you're doing with people's data. Do you have policies in place around privacy, specifically that you want to talk about?
Ну, в нашем проекте
We don't store the personal data of our customers. We have some digital identificator of our customers, and like Arkady mentioned, if we take our data and, for example, the data on some loan application, then it's going to be a violation of privacy. And this can happen, and the state hasn't yet regulated this. So it's not regulated, but in the future it will be. So our company positions itself as the company that never provides data outside. Like when you fill in some questionnaire and it's easy to identify how much money you have, what you bought. So we do not store the names of some people that might be interesting. Of course, we are doing our best to protect the data, but there are hackers and they can just steal this data. So we try to do our best to exclude this.
Actually, one of the most important part of big data is decision support system, development of decision support system, and this is mostly 40 years old market. Can you estimate market in Russia for decision support systems? And one more question for Yandex. Yandex заинтересован вообще купить компании или инвестировать?
Is Yandex interested in investing money into the companies that generate some algorithms or products that help decision-making? So first of all, I'll make a comment about market assessment. It's true that we explore the situation and startups in particular. For example, we are interested in startups that help collecting geodata. So how big is this market? And what we can see here, philosophically speaking, I can say that that's a new industrial revolution that opens new opportunities for all. If we take GDP of all humankind and all the products that are generated by humankind, we can say that it's $100 trillion per year, 70 to 100 trillions. So if 10% of this amount could be improved by a better processing of big data, then we can say that 10 trillion out of that 100 trillion can be improved for $1 trillion. And so out of $1 trillion, 10% can be given to those organizations that get that. And it's about 100 billion per year for any company that can be, which is represented here. So that's the value That's the profit that the humankind can receive by sheer processing of data.
Sergey, you have anything to add on that?
Ну, вы знаете, я абсолютно согласен с Аркадием. То есть
I agree completely with what Arkady said. Big data market can be understood intuitively, and you can really make these calculations using approximation method. Many agencies and analytics haven't yet agreed on what is included into big data market, whether they are decision-making support tools or the tools that help analyze and process data, or BI systems that are which creates a traditional market. So there's no single view onto these problems. And like any other new market, there's a period of development. And if we even take a look at the definition of big data, it's changing every year. But I agree with what Arkady said. The market for consuming tools for big data processing maybe is not that big here in Russia, and it cannot be compared with other sections or sectors in the IT market. But the market of services and some additional services generated on the basis of big data analysis is very big. For example, in the US, it was identified in the amount of hundreds of $millions for healthcare only. So these services can be provided based on just X-rays and reducing costs for insurance. So the situations in different countries are different, but it doesn't depend on IT development. It depends on what areas are better developed in different countries. For example, in this country, the situation is different. The market here is underdeveloped if we compare it with the United States. So we can speak about GDP of Russia and see the percentage of that, and it can be improved if we work together and provide new solutions and new technologies.
And then I'll get over you over there.
Hello, my question is for Arkady and maybe for Roman. There are many interesting projects at the moment that uses different flows of big data. For example, the Japanese government is going to plan to collect data from different sources, search engine and information about receipts, and it's going to be done continuously. And some other parameters also, but these are two key parameters. So they can predict some crisis from very early. Maybe it's easy for the government, but apart from data analysis background, it's also important to analyze all this information based on the flow model or streaming. Based on streaming, do we have some legal obstacles? Because, of course, data can be cleared. Yandex can provide clean data, or Megaphone can provide clean data that is not personalized. That is not personal data. There are there are different ways to solve these issues. And speaking about search requests is the easiest thing. In 2006, in September, 2 months before the economic collapse, the requests changed dramatically with regard to consumer goods, cars. So now our system has learned this. And by observing certain changes, you can already make conclusions. There are examples that I know about predicting some diseases, some epidemic diseases, and or for example, dry season. And by analyzing some systems, some people can already predict dry season in certain regions because they can analyze signals. So I would like to expand this. We cannot imagine how many signals can we consider. And different signals can be analyzed, and they can affect many other things, and different combinations of signals can be very important. Any machine learning algorithm receives hundreds and thousands of signals. So the way this machine works is not something that we can describe using human language, because our human language is very poor. When we speak about advertising, we want to sell our product, and so we give description that it would be good for men, give the age, and give their place of residence. And the targeting system of Yandex has 400,000 classes, not just gender-based, men, women, elderly people, younger people living in some regions. So 14,000 classes cannot be 400,000 classes cannot be described by human language. So any kind of ad can be targeted by using these 400,000 classes. So we have to speak human language, which is words and sentences, whereas machine uses much more detailed protocol. And if we speak about machine-to-machine interaction, they use completely different words. And so there are so many things that can affect other things unexpectedly. So sometimes it's very difficult to say what affects what, but the signals are very interesting and very different. I can add that you have raised a fundamental problem. For example, we have some data, and maybe Yandex already has this data, that we don't even have an idea of how we can use that data. So once the person can formulate a problem, this is the first step to do this work, and you can say that this will be a result if you have this, and then the other result if you follow a different trajectory. So, of course, it's very important to formulate the problem specifically. Maybe the machine will be able to formulate the problem at some point. I'd love to answer this. Actually, there are such projects. For example, we worked for Vodafone, and we implemented this project, which is about universal storage. It collects all kind of data from telecommunication operator data, from internal systems. So it's possible to find the correlations between different events and just respond it like you do it in online environment. And that's the way how you can use it for commercial purposes. It's just one of the examples for commercial use. You can combine different open data. We worked with taxation service in CIS country. They are going to put 250,000 cash points and analyze all the receipts or checks. So they have to, first of all, collect taxes and then see all kinds of things, behavior and all kinds of the operations, and then they can combine it with the geography of the country and get analysis. The question whether they are ready or not is not relevant, but technically it's possible. There is every set of data belongs to some person, so it'll take quite a long time to be able to regulate all the relationships. So there are so many issues that we haven't even started thinking about.
Malaysia. I've been hearing quite a fair bit about the hard side of big data analytics, meaning the logical side of things. Can someone talk about the softer side of things, perception management, as well as also things that are contextual in nature? So it's not necessarily just about transactional data. What about data that comes in about people's context and feelings and preferences that are not necessarily based on hard numbers?
Sean, are you guys doing anything with this?
So that's an interesting question.
Entrepreneurial opportunities arising from there is basically what I'm trying to get to.
So the question is there such a thing as this soft, big data, I guess? So that's interesting because certainly from my perspective, if we're going to do anything with data, it has to become data, numbers. But that's not to say that we can't capture and do something meaningful with people's sentiments and feelings. For example, I know that a couple of our customers are trying to use technology to understand what their customers are thinking or feeling about their products by watching what they say and what they tweet about. That could be as simple as detecting when someone's written a message saying this product is great or your product is terrible. But it might be more subtle than that. For example, I go to watch a video on your site and I watch it all the way through. That's pretty good. If I turn it off after 5 seconds, that probably means I didn't like it. That's a hard data fact, but it says something quite clear about what I felt. And I think that's increasingly important because ultimately, I'm not as interested. I think it's not as interesting to measure just how many people are watching videos, or how many times people went on to watch another video or buy another product. But it's interesting to understand what about my site and my service makes people happy, and what makes them want to continue, what turns them off, for example. So I think that you can measure some of the soft data with careful application of measuring the hard data you have.
I actually think
Я бы подумал над тем, чтобы на то, что также происходит в Твиттере. Они смотрят на такие вещи, как люди, что люди думают, опрос.
so. I do look at that example and look at what they've done and think about.
This is an entrepreneurial opportunity in itself. There's, as you say, many startups trying to provide these kinds of services. It goes under the name sentiment analysis. It's certainly an opportunity.
Talking.
Yeah, go ahead.
Following, talking about contextual and understanding of what people want. I'm sorry, in Russian.
Classical understanding of current economy of the internet is as follows. 60% of money is generated by search engine and search advertisements. Search engine responds to an inquiry, and part of these questions are commercial, On the commercial part, the whole of internet is monetized. I think that this is the old model, and what goes on now, I would like to, it's just answering questions. And now we are coming to understanding the user and an attempt to guess the user's wishes and his next step. It's more than answering a question. It's more than demonstrating what's going on online and offline. The search engine will guess our wishes. It will adjust to us, and it will give us advice, probably in advance, what we should do next. We can follow this advice or not, and this will be our role. Like today, the car can be our choice. We can travel by car, by train, or walk. And the same will happen to engines in the intellectual sphere. They will expand our opportunities and predict our next steps. Part of our wishes is commercially focused, and in this sense, we will commercialize future internet. Simply answering question is no longer important. Now we predict wishes. It's a question to Arkady. There are technologies for tying in different types of data, statistics, figure, image, sound, video. Are there any developments now, and how can it be joined in order to analyze these data? Yes, there are technologies, and they're working. Could you give some examples? Photo, video. Today at the first session, chief editor of Cloudera spoke. He said that everything should be collected into big data, photos, videos, all the information. Are there any tools to tie in photos with videos? Maybe you know how it can be done. Technologically, this is arranged and streamlined, and then it is easier to analyze it. Could be photo, could be speech, could be movement, could be a person's internet activities, a person's card accounts. You can analyze all this. Technologically, this is possible. It can be summed up and analyzed. But it is the idea that matters. Technology allows it. There are examples of startups that analyze texts, videos, and photo information. I know one scoring system, anti-fraud. It analyzes all that. Another system improves conversions in Salesforce systems. When you phone somewhere and the system enters open web, it analyzes your contacts, video information, Facebook. Are you closer to dogs or cars? It analyzes his behavior from open sources, his texts, and gives you the probability of a conversion of this user. It is a live system that is working now. are there any prospects for using big data in an energy sector? I have an example from the energy sector. It is not just energy generation, it is energy transmission. We had a customer. There is a system of electric line systems. They pass through rural areas, and they are very expensive in servicing. There is a company that now uses flying devices that fly over these electric lines, photograph them and video film them. They analyze whether these lines are straight or hanging, and whether it is what is the degree of error. And it is a real task, and it is solved.
This is an example from retail energy, the retail energy business. So I think we've all heard of smart meters, devices that can measure how much energy you're using at different times of the day. I've seen, I think, a more interesting device that plugs into your home's electrical system and can listen to the small variations in the flow of energy on the line that are caused when a large appliance like a refrigerator or an air conditioner runs. It actually causes small fluctuations in the voltage that can be learned. So even though the device doesn't understand that you own a refrigerator, it can learn that something of a particular signature comes on at a certain time of day that looks like a refrigerator's signature, or in some cases a light switch, or an air conditioner, a cooling unit. And so from that, it can actually give you a much more fine-grained view as to when you're using individual appliances and how much they're costing you, without any input from you, without knowing anything about your household other than what the signals on your energy line. I found that a very intriguing use of data, of machine learning, that I wouldn't have thought of myself. That's an example of the entrepreneurial cleverness, finding new ways to use data that most of us would look at and not find useful.
Я вспомнил еще один пример из генерации электроэнергии. Это реальный стартап израильский, который производит сенсоры для ветряных мельниц, для windmills. Они меряют температуру, ветер и так далее, все, что там есть, и они собирают эти данные со всех ветряных полей во всем мире. Дело в том, что
From all the windmills, the system of selling energy is different based on how much is generated. And watching the weather in different parts of the globe, they predict minute by minute where the electricity will come from. And in sales, in the grid, and they save money, billions, and then make real money because they are watching winds and temperature on windmills all over the world, and electricity prices change every minute. Another example about energy. We have been cooperating for several years with Silver Spring, a U.S. company. It's a network operator. They sell electric power, and they have been using our technologies for several years to collect online smart meters, information from these smart meters, information about consuming. They calculate dominating harmonics, and they predict, well, you remember blackouts in the United States. To avoid them, they look what is the load when in what part, and they know how to manage them. And the second case is dynamics prices for electric power. When power consumption grows, they in Moscow, we have 2 or 3 rate meters, and they can change energy price online. Big data technologies are used a lot. Big equipment producers for generators and electric power stations, Siemens electric power stations, start using big data technologies to analyze equipment and predict failures, to predict the amount of energy generated in different situations. So energy sector is a big consumer of these technologies. I would like to revisit the issue that was asked by Malaysia representative. The State Duma from 95 to 97 organized international conferences on international medical and social card together with Samsung. All the data is entered from the birth of a child, and it was this network was supposed to be international, which was funded by international medical insurance system. This card is unique. There was a question from Malaysia. In high-tech show, we showed this card, and it doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We handed out several thousand of such cards with all types of data. It contains all the data on a person, and the main thing is the ability to enter international medical insurance system. It contains all the data on blood and etc.
Такой вопрос, вот мы сейчас все.
We are discussing the opportunities of using international big data systems. Why don't we go back to that development? It is an international development, and it is already written 3 volumes, and the electronic card is ready too. It was over in '98. Whom shall we give it? If Malaysia takes it, it's okay. They will have it.
Time for one final question. Who wants to take that? Any takers? There we go, right here.
Коллеги, очень короткий.
Colleagues, I have a short question with a small introduction. It's a follow-up of what Arkady has been saying about 2007 and the financial crisis, when Yandex, using its data, could predict events. Many financial institutions, after the crisis, decided that many financial models and statistical models were interpreted in a wrong way or were not used properly. How can we protect ourselves from erroneous interpretation of big data, and how can we avoid this risk? My answer is there's no way, and what you are describing is not the sphere. One time we are discussing it is all statistics. To be applied to one-time events is useless. And your answer will be 48% probability of something. If you have a big flow, 48% means that it is 48 out of 100. If you have one event, it means nothing. Then you should be very cautious about using big data. Сейчас мы сделаем заключение, начнем с Романа. Пожалуйста, дайте ваш прогноз Ну вот через 2 года, как вы думаете, какая будет основная тема по большим данным? I think that the first, we will have many health projects. Internet is great, but in terms of forecasting, predicting diseases, getting samples, these things are not automated, and I have to spend a few hours to have my blood tested. And there's the question of privacy. Now, people don't think much about it, but my more sophisticated colleagues start thinking about it because we are working in this sphere. Later on, these issues will become more urgent, and probably some legislation will be adopted in this respect. I think these are the 2 main topics we will discuss tomorrow in 2 years.
I suppose, again, I come at this from an engineering perspective, and I come at this from the data science perspective. I'm disappointed that these data science and machine learning are still a little bit hard to use. For example, right now, if I want to deploy a database, I can download some open source software like MySQL and run it and put data in, and data comes out. And there's not a great reason machine learning has to be harder than that. It should be about that easy, and it's not yet. Certainly not in the open source tools world. So in 2 years, I want us to be there, so that when you have an idea about how data could predict something that's valuable to you, you can run a system, put a lot of data in, terabytes of it if you want, and have answers come out, and move on to be thinking about how can I improve the model, or what other factors could I collect, rather than where do I begin, how do I even start to build such a system. So I'm hoping that the mechanics, the plumbing of data science gets a lot easier in the next 2 years, so we can have, be back here talking about more interesting applications of the machinery rather than how to build the machinery.
Excellent, Sean. Thank you. Sergey.
Вы знаете, я очень надеюсь, что на горизонте следующих 2-3 лет мы перейдем.
I think that in 2 or 3 years, we'll start thinking what is big data and what we need it for. And more than that, we'll speak of their practical usage in each particular area. 15 or 20 years ago, we discussed computers. What are computers meant for? And I can see the same in the aspect of big data. In fact, there is no phenomenon of big data. However, there are clear and mature technologies to process and store big data. On the other hand, there is a separate area which was formed long ago, and that is algorithm, machine education, and computer education, how these tools should be used. And the third important factor is user experience, our understanding how to use all these beautiful things in our specific company or institute or university or store. In 2 or 3 years, this part will be developing for the most part in order to understand what use can these tools bring. We will see new cases of using these tools.
Я думаю, что мы не будем обсуждать.
What we're not going to discuss in the next 2 years, the examples of data application, because they'll be everywhere. It's like a wave of mechanization. We got steam engines, textile machines. Then when I think about chemistry, again, there was a wave when we got all kinds of new materials. And where were they? They were everywhere. And electronics, it happened the same in electronics when we had all kinds of electronic devices. So it's going to be the same shift with big data. It's going to save a lot of efforts for the humankind, and it's going to be a new industrial revolution. So I guess in 2 years' time we are going to discuss breaking hopes of big data, because like any industrial revolution, it's like a pendulum, big hype and then disappointment. But then in 10 years later, like it happened to internet in 2002, yeah, we have Google, Amazon, Facebook, but I'm sure that in 2 years' time, there'll be their own Amazon and Yandex related to big data. So it's going to be the same. Machine learning will be everywhere, and big data.
Thank my panel very much for an excellent discussion. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your great questions, and enjoy the rest of the Congress.